and if you're online, thank you.
Bruce, what is the sequence of the introductory statements? I was not 100% sure from my.
So the sequence is the Commissioner, African Union Commissioner AU of Social Affairs will speak first, and then you will speak second, and then the Minister of Social Affairs, Culture, Arts and Tourism of Mali will speak, and then the Honorable Minister of Foreign Affairs of the DRC will speak, and then open up the session. So
Great.
That is the sequence.
Okay.
Thank you.
And I'm roughly on 7 minutes, probably. Is that okay?
Fair enough. Yeah.
I hope I can still come to an in-person.
AU Commissioner for Health, Humanitarian and Social Development, Commissioner Amira El Fadil, for Arts, Culture, Tourism, Republic of Mali, Honorable Minister Lutundula Peña-Pala, Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Democratic Republic of Congo, Mr. Peter Maura, President of the ICRC, distinguished panelists from the ICRC, UNESCO, African Union, OSEWA, Excellencies, ambassadors of the member states that are present here today, the Director of IPSS, Dr. Yoronas, fellow participants, ladies and gentlemen. It gives me great pleasure to welcome you all to this event that is jointly organized by the ICRC, the African Union, and the IPSS, which is part of the roadmap activities of the AU theme of the year 2021 on arts, culture, and heritage. Today's event is going to focus specifically on the impact of armed conflict on arts, culture, and heritage, drawing strongly on the evidence on what we witness today in the form of devastating consequences of armed conflicts on both tangible and intangible aspects of populations. The objectives are therefore to share experiences, successes, good practices in the promotion and protection of cultural property and heritage, basing on humanitarian international legal instruments. We are therefore delighted today that we have not only the Commissioner Amira with us, among us, but also honorable ministers from Mali, the Democratic Republic of Congo, President Maura of the ICRC, and distinguished panelists from ICRC, UNESCO, AU, and OSEWA. Before I hand over to Commissioner Amira to chair the first session, may I remind you all, the participants, that simultaneous translations are available in French, Arabic, and Portuguese, and you simply press on the icon of the language translation on the bottom so that you can access the language of your preference. I wish to now hand over to Commissioner Amira to deliver her remarks and to chair the first session of the opening ceremony of this very important event. Commissioner Amira, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bruce, our moderator. Thank you very much. Excellencies, ministers, Excellency Minister of Foreign Affairs of DRC, our chair of the Union for the year 2021, Excellency Mr. Kadiatou Konari, Minister of Culture, Arts and Tourism of the Republic of Mali, Excellency Mr. Peter Morer, ICRC President, esteemed colleagues from the African Union Commission, the Director of my department, and Madam Angela, Madam Mariama Sisi, and Madam Angela, International Committee of Red Cross staff, Institute for Peace and Security Studies, also representatives of this meeting, the UNESCO also, and Open Society Initiative for West Africa. I welcome you all to this very important event. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I'm honored to join this session on the impact of armed conflicts on cultural property, ensuring protection of our shared heritage under international law event. This event is part of the activities to implement the African Union theme of the year 2021 on arts, culture, and heritage, levers for building the Africa we want. This meeting is happening just a day after the celebration of the Africa World Heritage Day, and I would like to wish you all a very happy celebration. We celebrated yesterday with UNESCO and with our Africa World Heritage Fund and other partners. We did our celebrations yesterday. Since the adoption of the AU theme of the year by the AU Assembly, we have managed to organize some of the activities in the roadmap, and we managed to do so in spite of the challenges created by COVID-19 pandemic. We know that all of us, we are working in a very difficult situation, but we are insisting on not being hindered by this COVID-19. We know COVID-19 is the pandemic. It is challenging us all, health-wise, economically, socially. But in spite of all this, we managed to lead the implementation on some of the activities of the roadmap and the action plan on the theme of the year. I would like just to share with you by mentioning a few of these activities. First, the second virtual forum of ministers responsible for arts, culture, and heritage. The second one, actually, the second virtual forum of ministers responsible for arts, culture, and heritage, which was attended by ministers and representatives from almost all our AU member states. And this meeting contributed to the visibility of the theme of the year in the member states and allowed us to learn about their activities and how to establish synergies. And let me also stop here to thank the Minister of Culture of Mali. Mali is leading on the implementation of the theme of the year, because the theme of the year itself, it was a proposal came from the former president of Mali. So Mali has a role to play on the implementation, on leading the implementation of all the activities of the theme of the year. So thank you, Minister Kadiatou, for your efforts. Also, we had a meeting of partners in the arts, culture, and heritage sector, which also allowed us to define our roles and ways of collaboration and joint implementation of activities on the theme of the year for 2021. And it was on our side, it was also led this meeting by the director of the department. And we had a very fruitful meeting with our partners, and we spoke about the different roles of the partners. We also convened a webinar workshop with members of the Pan-African Parliament to also present some of our policy instruments that require ratification and request for their support at national and constituency level to fast track these processes. We had also a validation workshop of the revised AU Plan of Action on Cultural and Creative Industries, which will assist member states in strengthening and developing national interventions for the promotion of the creative economy. We are delighted that this particular event is the first one related to the protection of our rich heritage. And I would like to express our gratitude to the International Committee of the Red Cross, ICRC, and the Institute for Peace and Security Studies, IPSS, for this collaboration and joint engagement. I really appreciate the organization of this event of today. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the objectives of this event is to create awareness and to promote the protection of cultural property through international law instruments and mechanisms, such as the 1954 Hague Convention for the Protection of Cultural Property in the event of armed conflict, also the 1970 UNESCO Convention on the means of prohibiting and preventing the illicit import, export, and transfer of ownership of cultural property, plus the ECOWAS Regional Action Plan for the return of African cultural artifacts to their countries of origin, 2019-2023. Also the Convention on Stolen or Illegally Exported Cultural Objects. We have also our AU Model Law on the Protection of Cultural Property and Heritage, and we encourage ratification and domestication of all these instruments. One of the main challenges, Excellencies, we have is to raise awareness on the need to be party to existing international and continental instruments related to the protection of heritage. So we cannot say that all of our member states are fully aware of the importance of joining and ratifying all these instruments. Without convening appropriate, timely, and regular information about these international and continental instruments, it is not possible to intervene when issues related to the protection of cultural property arise. So we have to start by making our member states fully aware of the importance of these legal instruments, the international one, the continental one, and the regional one, and that we encourage them to join and to understand the importance. So when the time comes for them to intervene in any area that have conflicts and we need to intervene to protect our cultural heritage, we can do it if the countries are part of this instrument. But without it, it is impossible to intervene. We are also aware that in recent years, there has been significant destruction of cultural property and heritage during armed conflicts in Africa. Different from before, currently in many armed conflict situations, the damage on cultural property is targeted. This scenario has created an alarm which calls upon not only member states, but also the international community to deal with the challenges, as Africa is one of the most affected continents. We know that some of the conflict areas are in very rich cultural heritage areas, and whatever we can call them, rebel groups or those who are fighting the states, they are targeting these cultural heritage areas. So we need the help of the international community to put an end to these conflicts, because without having peace and sustainable peace, we cannot also manage to protect these areas. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the threat posed by armed conflict to cultural property and heritage can be mitigated by strong advocacy and sensitization campaigns on how precious and important our heritage is. And we have a role to play, us in the African Union, in advocating for the ratification and implementation of the international laws and instruments applicable to such situations. And that's what we are doing through the Division of Culture and through our other cultural specialized institutions. In order to protect African creativity and heritage, the African Union has developed a model law on the protection of cultural property and heritage. The model law sets out provisions for the protection of any cultural property and heritage against any form of violation, including trafficking and illicit transactions, theft, damage, destruction, or disfiguration caused either internationally or negligently, unauthorized export or commercial or non-commercial transactions involving cultural property and heritage. This AU model law on the protection of cultural property and heritage is a guide for member states to draft and to revise their national legislations on the protection and preservation of heritage, especially the cultural property. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I'm pleased to inform you that our charter for the African Cultural Renaissance is now into force, came into force after the 15th AU member state deposited its instrument of ratification. We believe that this is the time to act in protection of cultural property using the Charter's implementation guide, which was collectively developed and adopted by the SCC, the third SCC on youth, culture and sport. And Excellency, we are very late on bringing this charter into force. We have been trying for the last 2 years till we got the 15 ratifications. And I thank all those member states who came forward to ratify. I still encourage those who signed to ratify, and I encourage those who did not yet even sign to sign the charter and to work with us on the implementation of the charter's implementation guide. Article 26 of this charter for the African Cultural Renaissance requires African states to take steps to put an end to the pillage and the illicit traffic of African cultural property and ensure that such cultural property is returned to their countries of origin. This is a very important article, Article 26. Moreover, Article 29 urged African states to ratify the Convention for the Protection of Cultural Property in the event of armed conflict and the Convention for the Safeguarding of Intangible Cultural Heritage. And I use this opportunity to call again on our member states to do so. The above provisions of the Charter for African-Cultural Relations gives us the mandate to act on this critical area of protection of our rich heritage. Allow me, Excellencies, to call for concerted efforts in this front by AU member states, the AU Commission, and our partners to ensure restitution of illicitly trafficked cultural property, using also the Great Museum of Africa, which is a flagship project of the AU Agenda 2063. And we are planning to launch this Great Museum in the coming months. We are working with the government of Algeria to make sure that the Great Museum of Africa will be launched in the second quarter of this year, or before the end of the second quarter of this year. Of the AU Agenda 2063 as a hub, as agreed and endorsed by the sector ministers. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I wish to conclude by once again thanking the organizers of this event for their continued support in the protection of our cultural property from illicit trafficking. I would like also to thank the contribution of ICRC, IBSS, UNESCO, and OSEWA. Their commitment is really invaluable. And again, I sincerely appreciate your commitment to support our continent through the support of the African Union Commission activity plan or the roadmap of the theme of the year. Excellencies, thank you very much again. I wish you all a very fruitful and interactive meeting, and I thank you very much for your kind attention. Thank you. Excellencies, allow me to continue as a moderator for this first session, and I welcome you again, and I thank the commitment of the two ministers and from ICRC president, and also from other partners who joined us in this event. Let me call to the floor Mr. Peter Forer, ICRC president. Mr. Peter, I will call upon you to come and deliver your statement in this event, but let me again thank you for your collaboration with us at the African Union Commission, especially to my department in different areas, not only in this area, in all different areas, in health, in other areas of collaboration between us and you. The floor is yours, Mr. Peter. You are welcome.
Thank you very much, Commissioner, ministers, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues and friends. I really appreciate to be with all of you in this event today and thank the African Union, the Institute for Peace and Security Studies in Africa, for partnering with us on today's event and hopefully beyond. I have had the opportunity at several occasions, including in the Peace and Security Council of the African Union, to express our support to the Agenda 2030 on silencing the guns, to bequeath a conflict-free continent to future generations and enhance cohesive and prosperous Africa. We have proudly supported the continent's efforts to curb the easy availability of weapons and their illegal or illicit use. On a regular basis, our experience in supporting implementation of international humanitarian law has seen us joining forces. From the protection of healthcare facilities and personnel to the special attention just a couple of days ago for critical infrastructure and the preservation of cultural heritage, the ICRC has and will continue to put a very special focus on our partnership with the African Union and its member states. ICRC welcomes, therefore, the AU's 2021 theme of the year, Arts, Culture and Heritage Levers for Building Africa, the Africa we want, and the AU Executive Council's decision to develop an AU model law on protection of cultural property and heritage. The ICRC supports the plan to institute, regulate, and strengthen the protection of cultural property and heritage in the continent. The ICRC also seizes this opportunity to complement this aspiration with a commitment to provide technical and legal assistance in all endeavors that aim to enhance the protection of cultural properties through the national implementation of the 1954 Hague Conventions and the Geneva Convention and its additional 2 protocols. The model law approach is particularly welcome, as it offers at the same time the essence of best practices and the necessary flexibility to context-specific and national adaptations and sub-regional cooperation. The protection of cultural property during armed conflict, according to the 1954 Hague Convention, is based on the notion that the damage to the cultural property of any people is a damage to the cultural heritage of all mankind. Targeting cultural property is a war crime under international humanitarian law. Military operations have often resulted in the destruction and irreplaceable cultural property. Recognizing the significance of this loss, the international community in 1954 adopted the respective convention. Despite this, we continue to see cultural property damaged and destroyed in the context of hostilities. Timbuktu, Mali is one example of the devastation that has been witnessed in recent years. What has struck me personally over the last years in visiting so many contexts of armed conflict on the continent is the richness and particular fragility of cultural heritage, which contrasts with the neglect and indifference of too many belligerents. While there continues to be examples of destruction, we also want to acknowledge that there have been positive advances since the adoption of the 2nd protocol, such as greater sensitization of armed forces when engaged in hostilities, and many examples of national legislations that now seek to protect cultural objects. I take this opportunity to congratulate the 9 African countries that have integrated provisions with regard to cultural property protections into their national laws. I also appreciate the 28 African states have already ratified the Hague Convention and the 12 states that have signed the convention. I would like to use today's opportunity to call on the remaining 14 African states to ratify the instrument and assure them of ICRC's readiness to support them in their efforts. Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, it's incontestable that historic sites, monuments, antiquities, and cultural ceremonies transcend human generations. They help construct a sense of social cohesion and reinforce an individual and collective sense of identity and humanity. Africa, with its rich history and cultural diversity, stands out as a clear example of how the cultural expressions are intertwined with the daily lives of populations. Therefore, any deliberate attack on cultural properties can be considered not only an attack on individual identities, but an attack on the entire history of communities and the continent. In our world, we have witnessed the devastation and destruction of cultural and religious sites during armed conflicts and the profound psychological effect it has on people who are left disconnected, traumatized, and sometimes even persecuted. As we spend the next few hours deliberating on these important issues, we use this opportunity, therefore, to call on the African Union and its member states to push wider ratification of the Hague Convention and its protocols in Africa, to urge AU member states and regional economic commissions who have not yet done so to strengthen and develop national legislation and policies using the AU model law on cultural property and heritage as a guide. And finally, to urge AU member states to integrate the Hague Convention into military doctrines and AU peace and security organs to integrate the protection of cultural properties in the African Union Peace Support Doctrine for greater protection. Commissioner, ministers, colleagues, I really appreciate to be with you today, and I thank you for the opportunity to address you at the beginning of this important meeting. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Peter. Thank you for this statement, a very strong one, and thank you for your continued efforts to advocate for the protection of the African cultural heritage and properties. Thank you very much. Excellencies, allow me to call upon our Minister of Culture, Arts and Tourism, Minister Kadiatou Konaré, Minister of Culture of the Republic of Mali. Thank you very much, Mr. Kadiatou, for attending this meeting, and the floor is yours. Welcome.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Commissaire. Mesdames et Messieurs les ministres, Monsieur le Président du CICR, Excellence Madame la Commissaire à la Santé, aux Affaires humanitaires et au développement social, distingués invités. Avant tout propos, au nom du champion de l'Union africaine pour les arts, la culture et le patrimoine, Son Excellence Monsieur Mbandao, président de la transition, chef de l'État, et à mon nom propre, je voudrais féliciter l'initiative de ce forum virtuel et la pertinence du thème du jour, à savoir impact des conflits armés sur les biens culturels et le patrimoine, assurer la protection de notre patrimoine commun en vertu du droit international. Mon intervention aura pour but de partager l'expérience malienne en matière de gestion du patrimoine en période de conflit et d'instabilité sécuritaire. Distingués participants, de janvier 2012 à avril 2013, le territoire du Mali, dans sa globalité, mais particulièrement les régions du Nord, c'est-à-dire celles de Tombouctou, de Gao, de Kidal, mais aussi la région du centre, Mopti, ont été le théâtre d'une grave crise sécuritaire suite à l'invasion du territoire par les groupes armés terroristes. L'occupation de ces régions est à l'origine de la destruction intentionnelle de biens culturels de très grande valeur universelle. Les populations de ces régions, sous la domination des groupes armés terroristes, ont vécu impuissantes la destruction ou la spoliation des ressources de leur riche et inestimable patrimoine culturel au nom d'une idéologie des obscurantistes. Le riche héritage culturel dans ces régions a subi des atteintes graves sous ces aspects à la fois tangibles et intangibles. Distingués participants, cette crise multidimensionnelle a eu comme conséquence, entre autres, la destruction des 14 sur 16 mausolées de Tombouctou inscrits sur la liste du patrimoine mondial, l'interdiction des travaux collectifs d'entretien des monuments, notamment les mosquées. Environ 4203 manuscrits de l'Institut des hautes études de la richesse islamique Ahmed Baba ont été brûlés et 377 000 ont été exfiltrés vers Bamako pour échapper à la destruction. Autre conséquence, le musée Arsène Globe et le musée municipal ont été saccagés. L'interdiction des manifestations culturelles dans les régions occupées du pays, allant des événements festifs à la musique traditionnelle, le savoir-faire artisanal, à toute pratique de révalorisation du patrimoine immatériel. Il faut aussi noter qu'à cela s'ajoute la recrudescence du phénomène de pillage des sites et le trafic illicite de biens culturels, toujours hélas prisés sur le marché de l'art international. Distingués participants, suite aux atteintes graves portées au patrimoine culturel du Mali et aux menaces visibles et prouvées qui pesaient sur la valeur universelle exceptionnelle des sites du Mali, l'UNESCO, à la demande du gouvernement du Mali, a décidé d'inscrire le 28 juin 2012 le bien Tombouctou et le site du tombeau des Askia sur la liste du patrimoine mondial en péril. Lors de la 36e session du Comité du patrimoine mondial tenue à Saint-Pétersbourg du 24 juin au 6 juillet 2012. L'inscription visait à mobiliser la communauté internationale afin d'aider le Mali dans ses efforts de protection des sites, des monuments et de lutte contre le trafic illicite. La crise de 2012 a révélé le manque de préparation, l'insuffisance des moyens des services techniques de la culture, l'inexistence de plans de gestion des menaces et de risques, l'insuffisance de synergie d'action entre tous les acteurs concernés par la gestion du patrimoine culturel. Cette crise a également montré que s'attaquer délibérément aux ressources du patrimoine culturel en tant qu'enjeu de guerre revient à s'en prendre au fondement même de ce qui a permis aux communautés de coexister et de vivre ensemble. C'est aussi s'en prendre à l'histoire dans laquelle les peuples s'inscrivent sur la base de repères identitaires. Sans les ressources du patrimoine culturel, c'est l'identité entière des communautés qui disparaît, leur mémoire qui s'étiole et leur avenir qui se trouve hypothéqué. Distingués participants, le gouvernement du Mali, en collaboration avec l'UNESCO et avec l'accompagnement de la France, a initié et réalisé plusieurs actions prioritaires en vue de sauvegarder et de renforcer la protection du patrimoine culturel national. Parmi les actions figure l'organisation de la réunion internationale d'experts pour la sauvegarde du patrimoine culturel malien, tenue le 18 février 2013 au siège de l'UNESCO à Paris, aboutissant à l'adoption d'un plan intitulé « Plan d'action pour la réhabilitation du patrimoine culturel et la sauvegarde des manuscrits anciens du Mali ». Le Mali a certes ratifié la Convention de La Haye de 1954 et ses deux protocoles de 54 et de 99 pour la protection des biens culturels en cas de conflit armé. C'est justement pour élever le niveau de protection de ces biens culturels dans le contexte de conflits armés que le Mali avait jugé nécessaire d'adhérer au deuxième protocole de 1999 à la Convention de La Haye. L'adhésion du Mali à ce deuxième protocole nous a permis d'entreprendre davantage d'actions pour reconstruire, avec l'aide de la communauté internationale, le patrimoine culturel détruit de notre pays et de renforcer les mesures de protection dans un contexte de crise sécuritaire. Distingués invités, participants, parmi les actions notoires réalisées, on peut citer la saisine de la Cour pénale internationale contre les mouvements armés occupant le nord du pays. Cette saisine de la Cour pénale internationale a abouti à la condamnation à 9 ans de prison d'Ahmad Al-Faki Al-Mahdi pour la destruction des mausolées de Tombouctou, une première dans l'histoire de cette Cour. La Chambre a ensuite ordonné des réparations individuelles, collectives et symboliques pour la communauté de Tombouctou et a reconnu que la destruction des bâtiments protégés a causé de la souffrance aux personnes à travers le Mali et à la communauté internationale. Elle a ensuite déclaré, la Cour, que M. Mahdi est responsable pour les réparations estimées à 2,7 millions d'euros. C'est pourquoi je voudrais saluer la Cour pénale internationale pour avoir considéré la destruction des biens culturels comme un crime de guerre. À la demande du gouvernement du Mali, le tombeau des Askia a été inscrit sur la liste des biens culturels sous protection renforcée le 8 décembre 2016 par la décision 11.com 5.2. C'est le lieu aussi de saluer les efforts de plaidoyer engagés par l'UNESCO auprès de la communauté internationale et des Nations Unies, ayant abouti également à l'adoption en avril 2013 par le Conseil de sécurité de la résolution 2100 qui intègre dans le mandat de la mission multidimensionnelle intégrée des Nations Unies pour la stabilisation du Mali, la MINUSMA, une mission d'appui aux autorités pour la protection des sites historiques et culturels. Cette disposition, grande première, inédite dans l'histoire des opérations de maintien de la paix, consacre la reconnaissance du rôle clé de la culture dans le processus de paix. Tout récemment, le 30 mars 2021, un héros symbolique a été remis à l'État malien et à la communauté internationale représentée par l'UNESCO par le Fonds au profit des victimes de la CPI, en réparation de la destruction en 2012 par des djihadistes d'une partie des mausolées de Tombouctou dans le nord du Mali. Pour perpétuer la mémoire des victimes du terrorisme, le gouvernement du Mali, à travers le ministère de la Culture, de l'Artisanat et du Tourisme, a dédié une place dénommée Place des victimes du terrorisme et intégré une stèle au nom des martyrs et victimes du terrorisme au Musée national de Bamako. Ce monument a été illustré par un tableau d'art intitulé « Non au fanatisme religieux ». La cérémonie d'inauguration du monument a eu lieu le jeudi 1er avril sous la présidence du président de la transition, son Excellence Bandao, avec à ses côtés de nombreux invités. Cette initiative du ministère de la Culture, de l'Artisanat et du Mali vise à donner une dimension culturelle et mémorielle à la cérémonie de remise de l'heureux symbolique de réparation des préjudices subis par les victimes du terrorisme par le Fonds au profit des victimes de la CPI. Distingués participants, les atteintes graves portées au patrimoine culturel constituent une source de destruction qui altère profondément la paix et accentue les phénomènes de la stigmatisation, de l'exclusion et de la division au sein des communautés gardiennes de nos valeurs culturelles. Les défis essentiels auxquels les communautés de sites ont été confrontées se résument à deux interrogations essentielles, à mon avis. La première des interrogations, comment développer des mécanismes de résistance appropriés pour minimiser les attaques ciblées et massives planifiées par les occupants terroristes? Deuxième interrogation, comment se préparer à une résilience indispensable face aux restrictions imposées par les occupants en ce qui concerne certains comportements et pratiques culturelles identitaires? Suivant le cas et les circonstances, selon les cas et les circonstances et les lieux, des réponses locales ont été apportées. À Tombouctou, par exemple, où des opérations audacieuses d'exfiltration ou des caches in situ des manuscrits anciens effectués furent entreprises par la population. À Gao, il y a eu une forte mobilisation, une résistance organisée de la population avec comme fer de lance les jeunes. Au pays d'Ogon, certains villages sur le plateau et dans la région des falaises ont procédé à l'organisation de cérémonies et pratiques rituelles sous forme de prières et de sacrifices pour demander la protection divine et celle des ancêtres. En conclusion, je voudrais dire ceci. Sans une forte mobilisation de tous les acteurs concernés, il est difficile de procéder à une conservation durable et à une gestion efficace des ressources du patrimoine culturel. La culture, c'est ce qui doit nous rester lorsqu'on a tout perdu, même en temps de conflit. Le patrimoine doit être préservé. Je vous remercie pour votre attention.
Thank you very much, Minister Kadiatou, for this excellent statement. And I join you when you said that we need to mobilize all partners, all stakeholders, and all actors to protect our cultural property. And also, I join you and I give you the commitment of the African Union with its different departments on conflict resolution issues and silencing the guns in Africa initiative. We need to silence the guns in Mali, in the north of Mali. We are committed to work with the government of Mali to fight terrorism and to make sure that peace will be sustained in this area, and Timbuktu civilization, it will be safe, not only for Mali, but for the whole continent, because it's really important for the whole continent to protect the cultural properties we have in your country. Thank you again, Minister Kadiatou, and we will continue with leadership on the theme of the year. We will continue our implementation of our different activities in the plan of action and in the roadmap. Thank you. Thank you, Kadiatou. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, let me call Her Excellency Mrs. Marie Tumba Nzeza, Minister of Foreign Affairs of DRC. I think it's been changed. The minister, I've been informed that the name is not the name I have. I would like to be corrected, but let me call upon the Minister of Foreign Affairs of DRC. Minister, are you online with us? Okay, I think now I'm being given a different name. My apologies, Minister. My apologies, and welcome to the floor. I welcome the Minister of DRC and the Vice Prime Minister. I welcome him to this event, and I welcome him also as a representative of the chair of the Union for 2021. Welcome, and the floor is yours.
Oui, madame, je voudrais effectivement corriger, c'est M. Christophe Lutundula Apala. Je suis vice-premier ministre et ministre des Affaires étrangères de la République démocratique du Congo. Madame la ministre de la Culture, Arts et Tourisme de la République du Mali, Madame la commissaire aux Affaires sociales de l'Union africaine, Monsieur le Président du Comité international de la Croix-Rouge, Mesdames et Messieurs, c'est un honneur pour moi de prendre la parole à ce webinaire sur la thématique importante de l'impact de conflits armés sur les biens culturels. Il s'agit là d'une problématique capitale en raison non seulement des enjeux qu'elle contient, mais aussi du fait que les biens culturels constituent la marque de notre identité africaine et l'expression du génie créateur de nos peuples. L'intérêt et l'opportunité d'y réfléchir sont évidentes en cette année consacrée par l'Union africaine précisément au thème art, culture et patrimoine, levier pour construire l'Afrique que nous voulons. Permettez-moi, avant toute chose, au nom du président de la République démocratique du Congo, Son Excellence M. Félix-Antoine Tshisekedi Tshilombo, président en exercice de l'Union africaine, de remercier et de féliciter la Commission de l'Union africaine, le Comité international de la Croix-Rouge, l'Institut d'études sur la paix et la sécurité pour l'idée et l'organisation effective de cette visioconférence et pour avoir bien voulu m'y inviter. Mesdames et messieurs, nous ne construirons pas l'Afrique que nous voulons en détruisant nos arts, nos cultures et notre patrimoine culturel. C'est malheureusement les dangers qui guettent les biens culturels en Afrique, en particulier dans les pays encore nombreux, hélas, qui sont secoués par des conflits armés prolongés et des déplacements de personnes déracinées de leur territoire. Comment donc l'Union africaine, ses États membres, les comités économiques régionaux, les communautés économiques régionales et la communauté internationale tout entière peuvent-ils mettre en place des mécanismes pour sauvegarder les biens culturels pour les générations futures, même en situation de conflits armés? C'est ça la question fondamentale. C'est cela la préoccupation dominante de notre rencontre virtuelle de ce jour. Et la présentation tout à l'heure de Madame la ministre malienne prouve à suffisance qu'effectivement, il y a péril dans la demeure pour la disparition de nos biens culturels et donc pour la décadence culturelle de l'Afrique. À ce jour, il existe tout un arsenal remarquable d'instruments juridiques en la matière. En effet, le droit international humanitaire protège fort bien les biens culturels, qu'il s'agisse de Convention de Genève de 1949 et de ses protocoles additionnels, de la Convention de La Haye de 1954 et de ses protocoles additionnels, de la Convention de l'UNESCO de 1970 ou du statut de Rome, statut relatif à la Cour pénale internationale, pour ne citer que ce texte légaux, la préservation des biens culturels pendant les conflits armés est explicitement mentionnée. Ainsi, par exemple, dans le statut de Rome, prendre les objets religieux ou culturels pour des cibles dans les conflits armés est un crime de guerre. Pour sa part, la loi type de l'Union africaine sur la protection des biens et du patrimoine culturel rappelle que la protection et la préservation du patrimoine culturel incombent aux citoyens, aux communautés, aux sociétés et aux États. L'article 39 de cette loi fait obligation aux États membres de prendre toutes les mesures nécessaires pour protéger les biens et le patrimoine culturel pendant les guerres et les conflits armés, ce qui est assez significatif du point de vue du droit international humanitaire. Cependant, nous savons malheureusement que l'existence de textes légaux, aussi robustes soient-ils, ne suffit pas en elle-même à garantir effectivement les droits. Encore faudra-t-il qu'ils soient appliqués à bon escient et de manière rigoureuse. Cela implique un plaidoyer continu, une sensibilisation de tous les niveaux, des formations ciblées, une information pertinente et un suivi permanent. C'est ici l'occasion pour moi d'exhorter tous les États membres de l'Union africaine n'ayant pas encore ratifié, signé ou ne s'étant pas encore approprié ces instruments internationaux de le faire et rapidement. Cette exigence est d'autant plus contraignante qu'en réalité, les biens culturels, même ceux produits par l'ennemi, font partie du patrimoine commun de l'humanité et du legs permanent de génération en génération. Et pour nous, Africains, notre culture, dans sa diversité d'expression, constitue le moyen le plus sûr de marquer notre contribution au progrès général de l'humanité et de promouvoir un développement intégral adapté à nos réalités et répondant à nos besoins propres. Il appartient donc à nos États membres et à nos communautés sous-régionales et régionales d'assurer la sensibilisation ainsi que l'éducation de nos populations, de nos forces armées et de nos éléments de police nationale dans ce sens. Dans la même perspective, il est essentiel pour notre continent de continuer à développer et à accroître l'efficacité de mécanismes de prévention et de règlement de conflits, de règlement pacifique bien sûr, de conflits, afin d'en déduire le nombre et l'intensité. C'est le moyen le plus sûr, le plus efficace de prévenir et d'endiguer la destruction non seulement des vies humaines, mais aussi de nos biens culturels. Mesdames et messieurs, la République démocratique du Congo, mon pays, qui a toujours fait de la protection de l'identité culturelle de l'Afrique un des objectifs principaux de son combat pour l'émancipation de notre continent, se réjouit de ce que les objectifs de cette rencontre s'inscrivent dans l'ensemble des préoccupations que je viens d'exprimer. Il s'agit en effet, comme l'ont très bien conceptualisé les organisateurs de ce webinaire, il s'agit donc de 1. Sensibiliser et promouvoir la protection des biens culturels par des biais d'instruments et des mécanismes de droit international et encourager la ratification et la domestication de ces instruments. 2. Rassembler les principales parties prenantes en Afrique et améliorer leur compréhension globale de ce qui implique la protection des biens culturels dans le cadre de la Convention et de ses protocoles pour faire avancer les objectifs généraux du thème de l'Union africaine pour l'année 2021. Et 3. Influencer les politiques de l'Union africaine et des États membres, ainsi que les pratiques en cours en matière de protection des biens culturels. Au vu de la qualité du programme que vous avez mis en œuvre aujourd'hui, de la richesse et de la diversité des interventions, mais aussi de l'expérience et de la qualité des participants, je n'ai pas le moindre doute que tous ces objectifs que je viens d'énumérer seront pleinement atteints au plus grand bénéfice des peuples africains. Et c'est le vœu le plus ardent de Monsieur le Président de la République démocratique du Congo et en même temps président d'exil de l'Union africaine, de son Excellence, M. Félix Antoine Tshisekedi Tshilombo. Les vieux en Patemba, pour rappeler la sagesse africaine, n'avaient-ils pas raison de rappeler à nos consciences que chaque fois qu'un vieillard meurt en Afrique, c'est une bibliothèque qui brûle. Ils ajoutent, une bibliothèque que l'on détruit pendant les guerres, des biens culturels qu'on ne protège pas pendant les conflits armés, c'est toute une génération qui disent, ce sont des générations entières qui deviennent orphelines et tout un continent qui est privé de son âme et s'éteint progressivement. Pour terminer, nous n'allons pas laisser notre continent mourir. Avec nos arts, avec notre culture, avec notre patrimoine comme catalyseur, le droit international humanitaire comme cadre et les services des peuples comme boussole, nous voulons au contraire construire notre Afrique, l'Afrique des Africains. Plein succès donc à nos travaux. Je vous remercie.
Thank you very much, Minister. Thank you for this statement. My apologies again. Thank you, Excellency Christophe Lutondola, the Vice Prime Minister and Minister of Foreign Affairs of DRC. I thank you very much for this statement. We are really looking for the leadership of your country to give more and more attention to the implementation of the theme of the year. We have been engaging with your ambassador in Addis Ababa, and we would like also we had a meeting before with the committee that's been established by His Excellency the President for the collaboration with the African Union during the year of the chairmanship of your country. So we would like very much to work more and more closely with yourself, Excellency, and with the government of DRC to make sure that the theme of the year will be given more visibility under your chairmanship and the chairmanship of your country, and that the flagship project in Nigeria, it will be launched, the main activities of the theme of the year, it will be implemented, because we will be reporting, or His Excellency will be reporting to his peers in the coming summit of 2022 on the theme of the year. Thank you again, Excellency, and thank you for calling for more awareness in our member states and calling also for more partnerships for the protection of our cultural heritage and property in the continent. Thank you very much. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, let me end up this opening session by again thanking our three speakers in this opening session. Thank you to Mr. Peter Morer, ICRC President. Thank you to Mrs. Kadiatou Konari, Minister of Culture, Arts, Tourism, Republic of Mali. Thank you very much also to His Excellency, Mr. Christophe Lutondola, the Vice Prime Minister and the Minister of Foreign Affairs of DRC. Thank you for gracing us by being in the opening session for this very important event. And also I would like again to thank all the organizers and to hand over the second session to be chaired by Mr. Fahad Ahmed as a moderator. I will call on Mr. Fahad Ahmed to take over from me. Ministers, we are expecting you to be with us to continue in this event. I hope you will have the time to do so. And we will be listening to the presenters in the second session and in the third session. And then we will have our closing session, and hopefully we'll be closing by 2 o'clock this afternoon. We'll close this event. So Mr. Ahmed, Fahad Ahmed, are you online?
I am indeed. Thank you, Your Excellency, for handing over.
The floor is yours.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. My name is Fahad Ahmed, and I'm the ICRC's legal advisor seconded to the African Union. This morning, we've heard from our political leadership their commitment towards the protection of cultural property during an armed conflict. Now that we have the political will behind this important thematic, it is time to go into the details of the issue. What impact does the destruction of cultural property have on the affected population? What is the role that the African Union Commission can play in addressing this issue in the African continent? What legal framework applies to the protection of cultural property? Is the legal framework adequate, or is it only an issue of implementation? What role can regional economic communities and regional mechanisms play in addressing this issue? If you're as curious about these issues as I am, we are all in luck today. I have the privilege of moderating this distinguished panel of experts from the African continent and beyond. My panel today consists of academics, practitioners, policymakers, and representatives of influential international organizations. Together, they will identify the most crucial contemporary issues and answer the questions that can help states, communities, and all relevant stakeholders to better protect African culture and heritage during armed conflict. Some ground rules before we start. Please feel free to write any questions or comments in the chat box during the presentations. We will take all these questions and comments after all the panelists have spoken. The speakers will have 10 minutes each to make their remarks. Now, without further ado, I would like to invite the first speaker, Dr. Jonas, who is the director of the Institute of Peace and Security Studies. Dr. Jonas is the co-organizer of this event and has been at the forefront of designing this. Dr. Jonas, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Ahmed. Thank you very much indeed, Excellencies, honorable speakers, and distinguished guests. You set an excellent tone as excellent background literature, which is pragmatically and critically, of course, engaging. So I thank you so much indeed. Yes, I represent IPSS, but some of you might be asking, what is IPSS? Why is it for? What is it for? And what the hell is it doing here? You might be asking this question. So quickly, in 2 minutes, IPSS, Institute for Peace and Security Studies, established practically and theoretically to respond to questions like the ones my brother just posed. The impact of conflict on the population, what should be a sustainable way out from this violence that designates Africa, while Africa is full of resources, that is a resource of people, as well as, of course, natural resources, but known globally for its conflict, lack of peace, and at the same time, of course, poverty. So IPSS then has got 4 pillars. The first one is peace education. It believes that through peace education, we can transform Africa's image. Secondly, peace research. So not only educate, but make current scientific applicable policy research. Thirdly, community outreach. Go out, work with the community, listen to them at grassroots level, engage policymakers. So serving as a bridge between the leaders and the led. And finally, make these things into policy dialogue. That is, people like you, for instance, who are in ADES and around ADES, by monthly reports, and of course, having discussions together. These are what we call policy reviews, and we discuss every 2 months with a distinguished diplomatic community, and of course, African Union and many others. So IPS is working as both think tank and academic institution. After having said that, to very quickly focus on the questions raised, and particularly on the shared heritage, the impact of armed conflict on cultural property, and what impact it has on the population, what role should AU Commission should play, the legal framework, REX and RAMES. Yes, so what they should do, I think, these are very pertinent questions. And as I said already, very eloquent and very clearly, the previous speakers made it beyond any reasonable doubt why conflict prevails in Africa. And I could pick up 2 or 3 from that. One goes back to the governance deficit, particularly post-Cold War aspect. And we also see through our research, globally conflict is declining. But in Africa, particularly interstate conflict is almost growing. And particularly ethnic aspects, identity aspects, these were extremely triggering, or some even the social media being used so as to, you know, come to power in a shortcut way, and at the same time, definitely create ungovernable space, so that this ungovernable spaces remaining there, then the very population are facing these difficulties. The type of education we give, as I said, IPS has got mainly 2 visions. One is African solution, African-led solution for African problems. Second one is decolonizing our research, our peace research, our mentality, so that we can have homegrown knowledge, so that homegrown problems can possibly be dealt with. And then we ask 3 questions in my presentation here. Who are they? That have been destroying the cultural heritage? Who are they, to be honest? Our children. They are from Africa, not colonial power coming from outside, but they are from us. Why do they do that? There are a number of answers to this, but one is maybe unheard voices, unaddressed questions, governance issues, which you have mentioned a moment ago. And when I come to this, who are they? Once again, if you go back to Nigeria or come to Horn of Africa here, you can see Boko Haram. Or in Mali, what happened in 2012, the Timbuktu, Africa's icon, Africa's civilization icon, to be honest, being destroyed, not by colonials, but by our very children. And why do they do that? As we said, when Boko Haram came together under a shade of a tree, they asked the children, the youngsters with the BS, MAs, PhDs, asked themselves, what is the use of this Western education? Look at these papers. We have all qualifications, but we have no jobs. We are not creative enough. It doesn't take us to be entrepreneurs or self-dependent, even employability skills. We don't have it. So what is the use of this education? So as of today, it is Boko Haram. That is, Western education is haram, useless. So they have to get engaged in, of course, violence. So as to be heard, so as to be recognized, then destroy. But through destruction, they wanted to be known. Al-Shabaab raised the same question. For 20, 30 years, since the fall of Siad Barre, we had never known what's meant by education, civilization, trade, engagement. So what is the use of having this westernized education? We should create a sort of link with Al-Qaeda and many others so that we can have Islamic State, mind you, religion being radicalized, misused, And of course, these youth then definitely being the cause. And in Ethiopia, in Sudan, in Somalia, then across West Africa, East Africa, now even Southern Africa, particularly in Mozambique, I'm sure you've heard. Not only this heritage, the heritage, first one is human heritage, human beings being massacred, simply because our education failed to inculcate African values, to take care of African heritage. The type of education we give, seriously, we have professors, we have PhD holders in terrorist organization, among those who are destroying it. So we were saying education is the only way out, but now we ask what type of education? Type of education. What type of value education, peace education we are just delivering? Can they possibly focus on who they are? Can they just look back and then that Africa's civilization belongs to the world civilization? Remember 1992, when Taliban controlled Afghanistan, this started to destroy the particularly entire places of worship. And by then, UNESCO issued a statement telling them that this is not only that of Afghans, but also it belongs to the whole world. So you can't destroy. And then they stopped the destruction of temples. That is human heritage. In the same way, I think, for the question, what should we do? I should say, we must have international as well as regional cooperation through African Union, through African Commission particularly, which has been doing excellent jobs with IPSS, with many others, through education. And also appealing to national governments to inject in their curriculum peace education, African values. These must be out there. These should be taken into account. Otherwise, we are going to still time and again repeat what we have been facing across generations. And what should be done, particularly in relation to legal framework. You can have legal framework, but first and foremost, you must create understanding. Unless there is normal, healthy education that makes them sensitive to being human, how could you explain a professor, a PhD holder, who is enjoying when fellow human beings hanging upside down because they belong to a different generation, a different ethnic group or religious group? That's human belongingness, because they forgot that no man or no woman is an island, that we all are related to each other, being human. That has been forgotten, and ideology, religion, ethnicity, their values only were given priority. So I think we should revisit our education system. And it's through education, particularly through peace education, rectifying education, moral, ethical, value education, that we really can transform. Yes, we need AU education commissioners. Yes, we need legal framework. Yes, we need REX and regional mechanisms. But in the main, we should start from schools, from primary school, if you like, up to higher level. And secondly, short-term trainings, particularly on the heritage aspect. Yes, sort of campaign, awareness raising campaign across Africa, to be honest, because it's 2021, thankfully, this innovative and far-sighted leadership nominating 2021 for heritage and culture, absolutely success by itself, which can help us to aspire for Africa we want. The first one is our culture is our identity. Who we are is defined by our culture. The culture is defined sometimes as human imprint in their environment. So we have to protect that human imprint and environment and humanity at the same time. So for that, I propose strongly, based of course on scientific research, that let's start from education, from curriculum, relevant education that makes them aware, that makes them proud of being who they are, decolonizing their minds, their mentalities of always following what's been happening in Great Britain. When they saw someone toppling, then they started also toppling. In Ethiopia, a month or 2 months ago, a couple of students definitely toppled down some of heritage in Harar, which is eastern part of Ethiopia. And you could also see destroying the icons which represent Africa across the world. And such things can be stopped through education, through dialogue, through research. I thank you very much indeed. I'm very happy to respond back if there are any questions coming up. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Yunus, and thank you sticking to the time as well. Thank you for giving us an analysis of the non-state armed groups that are operating in the African continent and putting it in the context of the protection of cultural property and heritage. From getting an overview of what this the conflict could have an impact on cultural property, let's try to see what the African Union Commission is doing about it. How did this idea of the theme of the year came about? And what are some of the steps that are being taken? To share some of these issues with us, we've got Miss Angela Martins, who's the head of culture division at the Department of Health, Humanitarian Affairs and Social Development of the African Union Commission. Her main duties include the coordination of the development of arts, culture, and heritage and continental policies, and monitoring the implementation of such policies by the African Union member states. Ms. Martins is the coordinator for the implementation of the AU Theme of the Year for 2021, which is Arts, Culture, and Heritage, Levers for Building Africa We Want. She holds a master's degree in education and is a doctorate program candidate on arts and culture. Ms. Martins, I welcome you, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Program Director. Good morning, Excellencies. Good morning, participants. My presentation will basically be in 3 parts. The first part, I'll speak about the theme of the year, the AU theme of the year for 2021. Then I'll move on to refer to the support that the AU gives to member states on the protection of cultural property and heritage. And the final part, I'll speak a little bit about the AU model law on the protection of cultural property and heritage. As you are aware, the AU theme of the year for 2021 was adopted by the 37th ordinary session of the Executive Council, which was held virtually from 13 to 14 October 2020. The theme of the year, as we know, is arts, culture, and heritage, levers for building the Africa we want. It came about out of the need to make the sector, the arts, culture, and heritage sector, more visible, and to request or to sensitize member states to pay more attention to this sector so that it can provide a meaningful contribution to the economy of the continent. The adopted concept note and roadmap on the theme of the year for 2021 include activities in the following areas: arts and culture, health, wellness, and post-COVID-19 responses, promotion of African languages, history and oral traditions, the Great Museum of Africa, which was strongly mentioned by the Commissioner for Social Affairs, Commissioner for Health, Humanitarian Affairs and Social Development, Her Excellency Amira El-Fadil. So the Great Museum of Africa is a flagship project of the AU Agenda 2063. We also have activities related to youth and diaspora involvement. We also have activities related to culture and remittances, culture, heritage, and drug control reduction. And finally, we have activities related to traditional medicine. Since its inception, the OAU, now the African Union, has invested on protecting cultural property and heritage against illicit trafficking and participating in the negotiations for the return and restitution of cultural property in AU member states. In order to achieve this objective, the AU has developed continental instruments to guide and support the process. The instruments, for instance, one of them is the AU Agenda 2063, which in its Aspiration 5 has clear guidelines and guidance on the protection of heritage. We also have the AU Charter for African Cultural Renaissance, which recently entered into force. We also have, as it was mentioned, the AU Model Law on the Protection of Cultural Property and Heritage. Let me move on to the support that the AU provides to member states on the protection of cultural property and heritage. And I'll start with this question: why should we protect Africa's rich heritage? Arts, culture, and heritage is where Africa has comparative advantage with her unique offering. The unity of the continent is predicated largely upon our history and shared values. Protecting our common heritage is therefore a fundamental right to African unity and development. Human history provides concrete basis for and validates ideas. Our cultural property and heritage tell our stories. Protection of heritage is a matter of honor and dignity. As I mentioned earlier, Aspiration 5 of the AU Agenda 2063 envisages an Africa with a strong cultural property, with a strong cultural identity, common heritage, values, and ethics. So what support is the AU giving to member states? Basically, the support intervention areas by the AU is related to policy development, strengthening heritage protection through legal frameworks and capacity building. At policy level, we have the AU Agenda 2063. We also have the Charter for African Cultural Renaissance, which in its chapter 5 is on protection of cultural property and heritage, and states that the need to end pillage and illicit trafficking of Africa's heritage is essential. The restitution and return of heritage, provision of appropriate physical and environmental conditions to safeguard heritage, amongst others. With the recent entry into force of the Charter, as it was mentioned by the Commissioner, these provisions can be fully implemented by the AU member states. With regards to providing physical spaces for the return of heritage, the Great Museum of Africa, the flagship project, is mandated to be a continental hub for the restitution of cultural property and heritage. Also, the AU Pan-African Cultural Congress, the second one, which was held in October 2009 under the theme Inventory, Protection, and Promotion of African Cultural Goods, was an essential forum which provided guidelines to member states on how to protect and promote African rich heritage. The Congress stressed the need to upgrade national legislations, modernizing African national museums, and the strengthening of public and private partnerships for the protection of heritage. The discussion of the Second Pan-African Cultural Congress was the one which led into the development of the AU model law on the protection of cultural property and heritage. Following the Congress in 2009, the AU Commission undertook a study and inventory of all cooperation activities between Africa and EU with regards to cultural goods. And this study is the one that recommended the development of the AU model law on the protection of cultural property and heritage. On capacity building, we have undertaken various capacity building interventions on the protection of cultural property and heritage for museum personnel and law enforcement agents. We also have been working with the Carabinieri and the government of Italy, which we did a training for member states on the protection of cultural property and heritage for member states that speak English. Now in the pipeline, we have another training, which is foreseen for the near future for member states that speak the French language. Now, allow me to move on to the AU model law on the protection of cultural property and heritage. The model law was developed by a group of cultural and legal experts It was adopted by the third Specialized Technical Committee on Youth, Culture and Sport in 2018. It's currently waiting its final adoption by the AU Assembly through the STC on Justice and Legal Affairs. The model law has 44 provisions. So why was the model law developed? I just mentioned the consultancy that we undertook from 2013 to 2016, which was about the establishment of all ongoing activities between the European Union and Africa with regards to cultural goods. The study highlighted the following. There were no robust laws to protect African cultural property and heritage in AU member states. Many member states were not adequately resourced to create robust laws to handle the dynamic illicit trade in cultural goods. There were weak frameworks, particularly the non-ratification and domestication of the various conventions regarding cultural property and heritage. There was poor communication and awareness activities for the protection of cultural property. There was lack of sustainable structures for the protection of cultural property. There was slow pace, as mentioned before, on ratification on AU member states and international conventions. And so the AU model law on the protection of cultural property and heritage was a key recommendation in order to respond to some of these challenges. Key aspects of the model law include the model law uses the AU Agenda 2063 as its main framework. It vests ownership of cultural property in the state or authorized persons only. It provides for the establishment of a competent national authority for the protection of cultural property and heritage. It provides for community participation in the preservation of cultural property and heritage. It identifies avenues for funding. It provides for protection of undiscovered cultural property, including underwater heritage. It regulates handling of cultural property and heritage in possession of private individuals and institutions. And it provides for the establishment of a national register on cultural property and heritage. It also promotes integration of heritage in education into the national curriculum, as it was mentioned by the previous speaker here. It also provides for documentation and translation of materials on cultural property in African languages, and licensing and regulation of imports and exports of cultural property and heritage. So following the adoption of the model law, as I mentioned by the STC, we are organizing activities of popularization of this instrument. The first popularization event that we undertook was for the ECOWAS region, and this was done in 2019. We have popularization exercises in the pipeline for the other regions, and member states are really receiving well this instrument and using it to develop their national or strengthen national legislation. For instance, I can mention the Republic of Guinea, which developed a fully fledged model law following the AU model law as a guide. By way of concluding, I would like to say that destruction, looting, or illegal export of cultural property and heritage is a serious offense, as stated in various instruments, and it should be penalized. As mentioned also earlier, our heritage is a matter of honor and dignity. So let's preserve and protect it. I thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you very much, Angela, for that very comprehensive idea of the theme of the year. And also what was very crucial was the rationale behind the conception of the AU model law to address some of the challenges that you mentioned that you faced in the protection of cultural property. Just before I move to the next panelist, please feel free to provide your questions and comments in the chat box. After the panelists, I will be opening up the session for statements from member states. So please let us know in the chat box if you would like to make a statement. Now, moving on to the substantive section, I would like to now bring in the ICRC. And representing the ICRC today is Dr. Helen Durham. Dr. Durham is the Director of International Law and Policy at the International Committee of the Red Cross, headquarters in Geneva. In her role, she oversees a large global network of international lawyers, policy advisors, armed forces delegates, weapons specialists, sociologists, diplomats, researchers, and academic experts who work towards the respective international humanitarian law. She's been admitted as a barrister and solicitor of the Supreme Court of Victoria and the High Court of Australia, and has an arts and law degree very relevant to today's theme, with honors from Melbourne University and a PhD in international humanitarian law and international criminal law. Helen, it is my privilege to invite you to speak now. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And you're doing an excellent job at chairing, and it's really wonderful that you've welcomed us so warmly to this important discussion. Now, of course, while the past year has had many challenges and caused much devastation, I think the one thing that I'm very grateful for is the enhanced opportunity we're all having to have these global connections. So as you noted, I join you today from Geneva. So dear friends and colleagues and your excellencies, it's a great honor to be with you virtually and to speak on a topic that is very close to the heart of ICRC, the protection of cultural property during times of armed conflict. Now, I was fascinated to listen just then to Ms. Martin's overview, as you noted, of the negotiations and the motivations and also the practical steps that the African Union selection team has taken. It's very evident that the African continent has not escaped the damage of cultural heritage occurring as a result of armed conflict. And it's for this reason that the ICRC recognises, I would say, the foresight and the pragmatism of the African Union regarding the selection of the current theme of this year. And we're also thankful, sincerely thankful for the opportunity to partner on this important webinar and to do more work together. Now, as we will hear from the next eminent speaker from UNESCO, the Hague Convention and its protocols provide a very comprehensive framework for the protection of cultural property during times of armed conflict. However, I would like to add that the international obligations to spare cultural property did not begin nor end with the Hague Conventions. We think about the Hague Conventions when we look at this topic. But I think it's important to remember that even after the adoption of the 1954 Convention, subsequent IHL treaties have included the protection of cultural property within their ambit. So one needs to only look at, say, the first additional protocol to the Geneva Conventions for a very clear example of this. Now, the intent of this inclusion was not to short circuit the Hague Conventions. I think international law always builds upon itself, but indeed to provide a safety clause for referring to this included in the protocol and avoid, I would say, the risk of shortfall in the protection of cultural property in circumstances where the Hague Convention has not been ratified. So I think we have to look more widely than even just the Hague Convention. Now, in addition to these specific protections, because cultural property is normally civilian in its nature, the general protection naturally follows from the obligation in IHL to distinguish between military and civilian targets. So to the extent that cultural property is civilian, it may not be the object of attack. And this is an important point. The incorporation of questions concerning the protection of cultural property into mainstream IHL, so beyond that general protection, is justified by the fact that other issues of humanitarian law, such as choice of weaponry, proportionality assessments, are all raised when cultural property is used for military purpose, or if it's located near military targets. Now, finally, I think in this sort of legal analysis, it would be amiss of me not to mention the specific protections that have also become part of customary international law, and thus an obligation on all parties, regardless of whether or not they have ratified the particular treaty provisions to respect and protect cultural property during hostilities. So we've got customary law, we've got the general principles of international law, and then specific laws found in the Hague Convention and also in the protocols that talk about the protection of cultural property. Now, but this is an important discussion we're having, and let's be really honest. You might then turn around and say to me, well, Helen, this is very nice. We like to hear that there's a comprehensive legal framework that governs the protection of cultural property, but why are we still talking about this issue? What more do we need to do? Well, I think it's very honest to say that unfortunately, these rules, like many rules, both domestically and internationally, are far from being systematically applied. So I think esteemed gatherings such as this, therefore, is vital to find pragmatic and real solutions to support the enhancement of the implementation of the law. So I think the answer, if you ask me that question, would be, I agree, but we need to do more. So what is the ICRC doing to support the implementation effort? And I've actually seen that already we have a question that in fact I can answer in my presentation. What are we actually doing, particularly in your part of the world, to support the implementation effort? Well, the ICRC has been directly working with states to support ratification. And I must admit, I'm very proud to have such brilliant and hardworking, often young, but often the age doesn't matter, but very enthusiastic lawyers in the African region that will frequently support roundtables with inter-ministerial discussions on ratification, with discussions and support around implementation, drafting and planning processes. And I think this is a critical role the ICRC plays. As guardians of IHL, you as states own it, but we help guard it, is to play this technical assistance role. So when requested, ICRC also assists states in ways to integrate and implement the provisions of specific law that is international into domestic law, and to further support states in their task of protecting cultural property. The ICRC has produced various resources. For example, we have a toolkit or a guidance tool on practical measures to protect cultural property during armed conflict. We have ratification kits, which allow you to step through the processes. We have model laws and we have fact sheets. Perhaps it would be the opportunity at some point we could put these in the chat box from the web link, because I think these practical tools are very important to all work together. Now, universalization of protective frameworks is really crucial to achieving real protection. And I therefore would encourage all states to review their existing international obligations, and where not already done, begin internal discussions on the ratification of relevant IHL treaties that provide specific protection to cultural property. And as I mentioned before, in particular, the first additional protocol to the Geneva Conventions and the Hague Conventions and its protocols. Now, of course, the ICRC stands ready, as I noted before, to support you in very practical ways in this task. Now, the ICRC also has the privilege of convening regional and global IHL discussions. And these meetings provide a real opportunity for states to exchange with each other and with the ICRC on IHL-related topics of interest. Now, recently, the protection of cultural property in armed conflict has been the focus of dedicated regional discussions, demonstrating, I think, clearly an intense interest in this topic. Cultural property and the protection of cultural property has also featured heavily in the agenda of the Universal Meeting of National IHL Committees, which we had the honour of hosting in Switzerland in 2016, and part of the Commonwealth IHL Committee meeting held in Namibia in 2017. As has been discussed today, the protection of cultural property is cross-cutting and it's multifaceted with the interministerial responsibility. I know myself, when I was an ICRC lawyer in the field, had to deal with many different parts of the government, from those who deal with the environment, to the Attorney Generals, to the Ministry of Defence. So it's an interesting topic that intersects with many other areas. We therefore have found that national IHL committees, where there's a coming together of different expertise, and these committees exist in over 100 countries, have provided themselves to be very useful, in fact, essential experts in coordinating, being a body to coordinate in the area of IHL implementation. I do invite you also to read the report of the 2016 Universal Meeting of IHL Committees for really clear examples of how these committees have been shown to be very useful in promoting the protection of cultural property, especially in cases where there is no UNESCO committee in the country. The ICRC is also experienced at its supporting states to create such committees, such IHL committees, and I know my colleagues are available to you through our network of ICRC regional legal advisors, and obviously warmly welcome a discussion with you on this if it should be of interest. Now, moving beyond the legal implementation of IHL, while ICRC is certainly no expert in cultural aspects of the protection of cultural property in armed conflict, we leave that to other experts. We do have with our mandate 150 years of experience in humanitarian action across the world and of its specific working modalities and fundamental principles. So we have, I would say, relevant and valuable expertise on the matter to encourage parties to an armed conflict to abide by the rules of war. Now, where relevant, ICRC includes the protection of cultural property as an important part of our confidential and bilateral dialogue with warring parties, and moreover, through our privileged access to parties to war-affected regions, we're able to reach out to communities whose cultural heritage has suffered greatly in order to provide appropriate support. So, of course, my team of specialised advisors, which are all former military officers, so they're called the Armed Forces Delegates in my department, consult with states with the background knowledge of their experience and the humanitarian understanding. And we're invited to do so, integrate cultural property protections into training programs for the military. And that's another very important practical element, to have it in the training as well as in the legislation. The team also incorporates dialogue on the protection of cultural property into operational planning processes with the armed forces, and to maintain the option to inject elements of cultural property into, for example, military exercises. So such training and dialogue do occur on the continent, and the ICRC is also available in all states to discuss incorporating similar elements into existing or future collaborations. Now, finally, it is also of crucial importance that space be given to local actors for this vital work. Indeed, I want to close my remarks by reminding all of us that the local and national responders are often in the strongest position to deliver fast, rapid, and I would say culturally appropriate and sustainable humanitarian assistance to their communities. And in this sense, there's a role to be played by the Red Cross or Red Crescent national societies. Indeed, with over 190, I think 192 national societies represented in countries, the international movement of the Red Cross and the Red Crescent provides a very interesting model of global humanitarian networks that connects the local, the national, and the international levels in a complementary manner. So in other words, keep the whole of the Red Cross and Red Crescent movement on your radar, in your mind, when contemplating which actors should be brought to the table to discuss the protection of cultural property in your country, as I'm noted, ideally under the auspices of a national IHL committee. So to conclude, I wish to take this opportunity to sincerely thank you for the chance that we've got to discuss the protection of cultural property under international humanitarian law, to take a moment to share with you a little bit of what ICRC is concretely doing currently in this field. So as we see, with thanks to programs such as this and the selection of the African theme of the year, public awareness of this issue has increased. However, as we do know, recent armed conflicts demonstrate that much more needs to be done in terms of risk preparedness and ensuring effective implementation of relevant rules protecting cultural property in the event of an armed conflict. I hope that one of the key takeaways from this webinar will be the fact that you feel comfortable, if needed, to reach out to UNESCO, the AU, the ICRC and other relevant actors to take forward these discussions in your national context. As noted, the ICRC stands ready to support you to ensure that all steps are taken to protect your cultural property from the dangers of armed conflict. Our cultural property is common humanity, and we must, more than ever before, stand ready to protect that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Helen. Thank you for that excellent presentation and for identifying and sort of reiterating the relevance that the Geneva Conventions and the additional protocols also play in addition to the UNESCO conventions in the protection of cultural property, of the role played by the ICRC, UNESCO, and other actors, and how the states and other stakeholders should feel comfortable to approach these organizations for any support that they may like. And I really like the point about the local players playing a crucial role in this activity. So thank you for that. Moving on from Helen's presentation, we would like to now have a look at what some of the regional economic communities are doing and what role these RECs can play. For that, we have an excellent speaker from OSIWA, which is Open Society Initiative for West Africa. It's the next speaker is a Senegalese lawyer, Mr. Ibrahim Kane. He's the head of the Culture and Heritage Program of OSIWA. He's been the liaison person of OSIWA with the AU organs and institutions. He's litigated before regional and continental human rights mechanisms and has also contributed towards the drafting of the treaties. He's worked in close collaboration with ECOWAS, and today he will be speaking to us about his experience with ECOWAS as a REC. Mr. Kane, the floor is yours.
Merci, Monsieur Ahmed. Merci aux organisateurs pour m'avoir invité à ce webinaire. Et donc, je vais essayer de parler de l'expérience de la CEDEAO, qui est la première communauté économique régionale africaine à avoir élaboré une stratégie concernant la restitution des œuvres d'art. Alors, pour ce faire, je vais essayer de répondre à 3 questions. Première question, pourquoi la CEDEAO a estimé nécessaire de mettre en place un tel système? Comment la CEDEAO opère-t-elle en tant qu'institution régionale? Et quel rôle éventuellement la CEDEAO pourrait jouer dans le cadre de thème de l'année pour amener les autres communautés économiques régionales à jouer aussi un rôle aussi important dans la restitution des œuvres d'art qui devient aujourd'hui une nécessité. Alors, pour ce faire, il me faut d'abord présenter la communauté économique des États de l'Afrique de l'Ouest. C'est une communauté qui regroupe 15 États avec une population de près de 400 millions d'habitants, près de 600 groupes ethniques et linguistiques partagent ce territoire de l'Afrique de l'Ouest, qui est extrêmement riche en termes d'histoire, de géographie. Rappelez-vous seulement de l'Empire du Mali et du rôle qu'il a pu jouer dans l'histoire de l'Afrique. Cette communauté économique régionale, dès sa création en 1975, a inscrit la question de la culture au cœur de son action. Et lorsque le traité a été révisé en 1993, il a été particulièrement fait mention de l'importance de la culture en donnant un mandat à la Commission d'aider à harmoniser et à coordonner les politiques nationales des États membres dans le domaine de la culture. C'est pour ce faire que la CEDEAO, dès 1987, a adopté un accord culturel cadre qui, entre autres, avait pour objet, pour fonction, de créer une conscience communautaire entretenue par un sentiment d'appartenance à une même communauté culturelle fondée sur des liens historiques, linguistiques et géopolitiques. La CEDEAO, depuis cette époque, a donc œuvré inlassablement vers l'instauration, en tout cas, d'actions dans le domaine culturel. Et je peux vous donner quelques exemples pour vous montrer l'importance que les États membres de la CEDEAO aujourd'hui attachent aux questions que nous sommes en train de discuter. Pour ne prendre que l'exemple de la charte de la Renaissance culturelle africaine, je vous dirais que 14 des 15 États membres de la CEDEAO l'ont signé. Un seul État ne l'a pas fait, c'est le Cap-Vert. Et pour les pays qui ont ratifié cette charte et qui est aujourd'hui en vigueur, comme l'a souligné Madame la Commissaire, 8 des 15 États qui ont ratifié ce protocole, cette charte, sont des États de l'Afrique de l'Ouest. Donc, c'est vous dire l'importance que ces États accordent à cette question. D'ailleurs, ce n'est pas simplement au niveau africain que ces États agissent, mais même au niveau international. La Convention pour l'élimination du trafic des œuvres culturelles en Afrique a été aussi ratifiée par 10 des 15 États membres. Même le traité UNU3 aujourd'hui, qui est un complément de la Convention de l'UNESCO, a aussi été ratifié par 15 États membres par 5 plutôt États membres de la CEDEAO. La CEDEAO est aussi intéressée par les questions d'œuvres d'art parce que pendant la période coloniale, l'Afrique de l'Ouest ayant été colonisée aussi bien par la France, l'Angleterre et le Portugal, a connu vraiment une exploitation extraordinaire de ces œuvres d'art. Je dirais même un pillage organisé de ces œuvres d'art. Pour vous donner un exemple, un musée français qui est le musée du Quai Branly, sur les 70 œuvres d'art qui existent au Quai Branly, 25 000 sont originaires de l'Afrique de l'Ouest. C'est vous donner une idée du pillage qui a été organisé. Et de façon même plus globale, on peut dire qu'aujourd'hui, parmi le patrimoine culturel immatériel universel, 4% de ce patrimoine provient de l'Afrique de l'Ouest. Donc, c'est vous dire qu'au niveau de l'Afrique de l'Ouest, on a toutes les raisons de faire quelque chose. Et je vous dirais d'ailleurs que ce qui vraiment motive encore davantage ces actions au niveau de la CEDEAO, c'est que les États ont déjà pris des initiatives dans ce sens pour la restitution depuis les années 2000, et je vous donnerai quelques exemples. Au Burkina Faso, par exemple, beaucoup d'œuvres d'art qui ont plutôt beaucoup de biens communautaires qui avaient été volés aussi bien pendant la période coloniale que pendant l'indépendance, parce qu'il y a un trafic énorme qui se déroule dans cette région, ont été restitués aussi bien par les gouvernements français que même par le gouvernement allemand, puisqu'il y a des œuvres d'art qui ont été achetées par des particuliers. Il y a aussi le cas du Nigeria. La France a restitué des œuvres d'art en 2013, en 2014. Il y a le Mali, où en 2008, la France a été obligée, à la suite d'un scandale révélé par les médias, restituer au Mali des œuvres d'art qui avaient été volées sur le site de Thial. Vous savez que dans le cadre, depuis que le président français Emmanuel Macron avait donné le signal du retour des œuvres d'art, 2 pays africains ont pu obtenir des œuvres d'art, ont pu se voir restituer des œuvres d'art. Il s'agit du Sénégal, le sabre d'un ancien chef religieux, El Hadj Omar Tall, et du Bénin, où il y a 26 œuvres d'art qui ont été rendues, qui vont être rendues à l'État du Bénin. Donc, vous voyez que d'un point de vue de l'intérêt, la CEDEAO, on a tous les ingrédients qui forcent, en tout cas, à faire à renforcer les actions en vue de restituer une partie de l'âme des populations africaines. Alors, comment la CEDEAO a agi? La CEDEAO a agi d'abord au niveau des chefs d'État, puisque en décembre 2018, il y a eu une décision de la conférence des chefs d'État, la CEDEAO, qui a décidé de vraiment travailler en vue de la mise en place de procédures, de mécanismes de restitution des œuvres d'art, et qui a vraiment donné des instructions très claires à la commission de la CEDEAO d'élaborer un plan d'action pour matérialiser un peu la volonté des chefs d'État. Alors, ce plan d'action, bien sûr, aussitôt la décision des chefs d'État signée, ce plan d'action a été élaboré par la commission de la CEDEAO. Et ce qui est intéressant, c'est que ce plan d'action repose sur une vision de la restauration de l'héritage culturel, de la contribution régionale, de l'héritage culturel qui doit jouer un rôle pour contribuer à l'intégration régionale et au développement économique de la CEDEAO. Pour les États africains, cela doit se faire, des États, pardon, de l'Afrique de l'Ouest, cela doit se faire en ayant à l'esprit un certain nombre de principes, qui sont les principes de la coopération et de la synergie entre les États dans le cadre des négociations qu'ils vont entamer avec les États tiers. C'est le respect du droit international, c'est aussi le respect de la diversité et des valeurs des peuples dont les biens ont été spoliés, et c'est le respect du principe de solidarité et de subsidiarité entre les États. Et élément très important, c'est le partage et la diffusion de l'information concernant les œuvres d'art sur le continent. L'objectif principal de ce travail, c'est de contribuer au retour des œuvres d'art qui se trouvent en dehors du continent. Vous voyez qu'on n'a pas ciblé un certain nombre de pays, on a simplement parlé de la restitution des œuvres d'art qui se trouvent en dehors du continent. Et cette restitution doit se faire aux pays qui en sont les propriétaires dans le but de vraiment reconstruire un héritage culturel et régional. Et cela doit permettre à la CEDEAO vraiment de jouer un rôle important dans ce domaine. Et un certain nombre d'objectifs secondaires ont été attachés à cet objectif principal, c'est que la région doit développer une stratégie régionale de négociation. La région doit reconstituer son héritage culturel dans le but de consolider son identité culturelle. La région doit créer les conditions pour la réception des œuvres d'art qui sont volées, et la région doit aussi tout faire pour que vraiment une image nouvelle soit donnée aux œuvres d'art qui sont restituées. Ces éléments sont d'autant plus importants, et j'aimerais vraiment le souligner ici parce que c'est vraiment au cœur de l'action de la CEDEAO. La CEDEAO ne pense pas que les œuvres d'art doivent toujours se retrouver dans les musées. L'idée de musée est une conception coloniale. Là, ce que la CEDEAO veut, c'est qu'une fois que les œuvres d'art reviendraient en Afrique, ce sont aux communautés de déterminer la façon dont les œuvres d'art vont être maintenues, la façon dont les œuvres d'art vont être présentées au niveau de la communauté. Donc, la communauté joue un rôle important dans ce cadre-là. Et c'est d'ailleurs pourquoi que la CEDEAO, dans le cadre du plan d'action, a identifié 3 domaines importants de collaboration. D'abord, le renforcement de la capacité des États pour travailler, c'est-à-dire, et ce renforcement des capacités va jusqu'à créer des mécanismes qui vont permettre aux États de commencer à enseigner l'histoire de l'art et de l'archéologie dans leur pays. Vraiment renforcer les capacités de nos États dans ce domaine. Deuxièmement, protéger, valoriser et transférer toutes les connaissances relatives à ces œuvres d'art qui ont été retournées. Et en dernier lieu, développer la coopération aussi bien régionale qu'internationale pour bien organiser la restitution et établir un mécanisme régional de négociation et de coopération avec les États qui ont ou qui possèdent aujourd'hui nos œuvres d'art. Donc voilà, grosso modo, les trois mécanismes, les trois principaux mécanismes, en tout cas, domaines dans lesquels la CEDEAO pense pouvoir faire son travail dans le cadre de la restitution. Bien sûr, la CEDEAO a mis en place un mécanisme de mise en œuvre de son plan d'action. Ce mécanisme de mise en œuvre se situe à deux niveaux. Le premier niveau, c'est le niveau continental, le niveau régional, avec la mise en place d'un groupe de travail composé de chefs d'État qui vont suivre le travail qui est fait. Et au niveau national, c'est la mise en place d'un certain nombre de communautés. La CEDEAO a également mis en place un mécanisme d'évaluation et de suivi qui existe au niveau d'Abuja et a aussi prévu les mécanismes de financement.
Mr. Kane, may I request you to make your final point now?
Yes, I'm coming to that. A mis en place un mécanisme de financement qui, le financement se fera par des levées de fonds au niveau du budget de la CEDEAO, par un partenariat avec le privé, par la coopération bilatérale et multilatérale et par l'aide des banques. Le dernier point que je soulignerai, et je vais terminer avec ça, quel rôle la CEDEAO peut jouer aujourd'hui pour faire avancer le dossier, surtout au cours de cette année où nous célébrons l'art et la culture africaine. C'est partager son expérience avec les États, avec les autres communautés économiques régionales. Je sais que la commission de la CEDEAO pense particulièrement à un travail avec la CEAC et la SADC, mais c'est aussi également partager l'expérience qu'elle a sur les questions juridiques qui vont être posées. Parce que ce qui est difficile dans ce travail de restitution, c'est gérer les problèmes juridiques qui sont posés par les États qui possèdent les œuvres d'art. Je termine juste, M. Ahmed, en donnant un exemple. Pour le système qui est mis en place pour gérer les œuvres d'art en Allemagne, donne le pouvoir aux Länder. Donc, l'État fédéral n'a pratiquement pas d'action. En France, tout dépend du ministère des Affaires étrangères. Et en Angleterre, vous avez une fondation qui gère à côté, au niveau du British Library, tout ce qui concerne ces œuvres. Donc, il se sera très difficile aux États africains de naviguer entre ces éléments-là. La seule option qui semble se dessiner pour que les États africains puissent eux-mêmes faire élaborer dans le cadre de l'UNESCO un traité qui va gérer non seulement la restitution en temps de paix, mais aussi la restitution dans le contexte des guerres, parce que la CEDEAO est aujourd'hui une région qui est complètement minée par beaucoup de situations de conflit. Et Madame la ministre malienne a montré tout à l'heure quel était l'impact de ces conflits. Donc, ce sont ces éléments-là que je voulais partager avec le groupe. Désolé d'avoir un peu dépassé mon temps et je vous remercie pour votre attention. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kane. Thank you for giving us that very insightful view of ECOWAS and the job that ECOWAS is carrying out in bringing the artifacts back, and the role that they've been playing in the last few years, particularly dealing with some of the Western states. As you mentioned in your last remark, you made a segue to UNESCO, and incidentally, that's our next speaker. I'm really happy to have Mr. Lazare Elondu with us, who is the Director for Culture and Emergencies at UNESCO since 2018. The entity for which he is responsible deals with all matters regarding protection of cultural heritage in emergency situations, restitution, and fight against illicit trafficking of cultural objects, protection of underwater cultural heritage, and museums. Incidentally, he was also from 2013 to 2016 the UNESCO representative in Mali and mainly responsible for coordinating UNESCO's actions to rehabilitate Mali's cultural heritage and ancient manuscripts. Mr. Elondu, welcome, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fahad, for giving me the floor. At the outset, let me first thank the African Union, the International Committee of the Red Cross, and the Institute for Peace and Security Studies for inviting us at this important webinar. And I would not continue, of course, without greeting the Minister of Culture of Mali. And I think it's good to have her, and I think it was important to hear also the perspective from this country. I'm not going to speak about the restitution and other issues. I think the purpose of my intervention, it's more on other issues, which is one of the primary objectives of today's event. It's how to create awareness and protect and promote the protection of cultural property through international law. I'm happy to see that this concept of this webinar not only talks about the core of treaties of international humanitarian law, and I think we have already mentioned the 1954 Hague Convention on the Protection of Cultural Property in the event of armed conflict. And I say in the event of armed conflicts because we tend to forget that this is actually one of the main important reason beyond the establishment of this convention. But I also see, of course, that we are considering other international instruments on cultural heritage, and I will not, of course, forget about the 1970 UNESCO Convention on the means of prohibiting and preventing the illicit export, import, and transfer of cultural property. And I believe that this discussion will enable us, all of us today, to take a holistic approach to the protection of cultural property and to explore synergies among different treaties. When we speak about the international legal framework of protection of cultural property in the event of armed conflict, but also in times of armed conflict, of course, we refer mostly to two sets of treaties, and I think this has already been mentioned, the Geneva Conventions and the additional protocols, but also the 1954 Hague Convention. But I'd like to concentrate more on the 1954 Hague Convention, which, as you know, is the first international treaty with a global scope adopted. And today, there are already 133 states that are parties to these fundamental treaties, and its core provisions are part of international customary law. And I wouldn't continue, of course, without saying that, of course, many African countries have not yet ratified this convention. I think it's important that we join hands together to continue build awareness and make sure that we share the important arguments for all the African countries, particularly when we are celebrating this year, 2021, which is an important year, not to forget the consequences of the destruction of cultural heritage in conflict, like it has been demonstrated by the Minister of Culture of Mali. The 1954 Hague Convention explicitly prohibits attacks against cultural property and also the use of cultural property for military purposes. It applies in the event of international as well as non-international armed conflict. And without going into details of this convention, I can say that they provide a comprehensive legal framework covering peacetime obligations, and we don't say it enough, but this is very important, such as the training of militaries, the adoption of criminal legislation, and also conflict time duties such as marking of cultural property, precaution and transfer of movable property, as I have said. I wish to inform the audience that UNESCO has recently launched a global reflection in developing monitoring and supervision mechanism for the implementation of the 1999 second protocol. And we tried to bring together experts from all around the world, including from Africa. And we are developing this mechanism that will enable us to conduct rapid monitoring of cultural property in case of emergencies and also in peacetime. And we believe that this process will be a major breakthrough for the deterrence of crimes against cultural property and their prosecution. And we all have in mind the recent event in Bamako on the reparation of the community following the imprisonment of Mr. Halmadi Al-Faqi to 9 years imprisonment. As part of the Hague Convention, I also have to touch about the 1970 Convention. I know that the 1970 Convention is particularly important for many African countries, and we've heard the previous presentation on issues of restitution, but here I want to talk more on the issue of the danger and the terrible impact of the illicit trafficking of African cultural property. And I know that while the 1970 Convention mostly applies in peacetime, you should know that its provision provides also protection in conflict scenarios. And I would like to say, and I think this probably answers one of the questions that was read concerning the issue of ECOWAS. And the primary objective of this convention, the 1970 Convention, is to enable state parties to establish internal mechanisms to prevent trafficking of cultural property. It is a very effective instrument. And I think I will not say this without reminding that still 17 African countries have not ratified the 1970 Convention. And I think the fight against illicit trafficking, it's a global fight and will be effective in all the continents if all the African continents have ratified all these conventions. I will also want to say that UNESCO promotes dialogue and exchange between states on the different aspects of all the treaties that I've just mentioned via regular statutory meetings on other hands. So we organize a wide range of activities to raise awareness and capacities. And one of our priority is Africa. And we'll continue to give this priority to Africa. And I think this year, 2021, we will see lots of joint action that will continue to do as we are doing today on the occasion of this. These activities will include training for the militaries, training for the police, training for custom and other law enforcement, development of tools and publication to facilitate implementation and provide technical assistance. If I can give just quick examples, we have recently launched an online training course for the military on cultural property protection. And this online training, which was developed jointly with the Peace Operation Training Institute, has enabled us to train over 900 officers from more than 100 countries. You also know that, and some of you know that we have published the first military manual on the protection of cultural property in 2016, and which has been translated over 10 languages. So we're planning to publish also this military manual into Swahili very soon. I can, on the last note, I have also to mention our fruitful cooperation with the ICRC. Some of you may not know, but since the signature of the Memorandum of Understanding between UNESCO and the ICRC in 2016, we have collaborated in, I will say, and I think Dr. Ellen Durham will agree with me, on more than 10 joint activities reaching out hundreds of military and government officials on different questions about cultural property protection. And we will continue together. We've been, and I think this meeting is very important. And in major events such as last year, the celebration of the 20th anniversary of the 1999 Second Protocol in Geneva, or one of the regional conference that we had on international humanitarian law dedicated to cultural property protection in Bali, in Indonesia, where we were also together. So there is still work to do. We have to consider new realities of today's armed conflict and streamline our programs. We have to think of innovative ways of cooperation that will enable us to expand the impact of our work, because we are facing post-COVID world, and we should not forget also about it. And we have to focus more on sustainability of results of work through supporting in priority national capacities. And most importantly, we must galvanize support for respect to international law. So UNESCO, the ICRC, and the African Union are well placed to shoulder these challenges. That's what I wanted to say aujourd'hui, and I would like to thank you for your attention. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Lazare Lundu. Thank you for that very eloquent presentation and for signifying the importance of the 1954 and the 1970 convention. To date, in Africa, 32 states have become party to the Hague Convention of 1954. 20 have ratified the first protocol, and 14 have ratified the second protocol, of which we celebrated the 20th anniversary in 2019. But thank you for making that. We will now move into plenary, and we will have statements from member states. I believe the representative from Sierra Leone would like to make a statement. Would the representative from Sierra Leone take the floor and make the statements? You have about 3 minutes to make your statement. Thank you. Do we have the representative from Sierra Leone? Okay, we'll come back to Sierra Leone. I have an intervention that.
Hello?
Oh, you're here. Are you? Yes, we hear you. Yes, we hear you. Please go ahead. Please go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much. I was having some technical difficulties. On behalf of the government and people of Sierra Leone, I would like to thank the ICRC for its altruistic efforts in silencing the guns without which the AU Hello, sorry, I'm back. I lost network. Can you hear me?
We hear you now. We hear you
okay,
now. Please
thank
continue.
you, thank you. Yes, thank you very much. As I was saying, that on behalf of my delegation, we would like to thank the ICRC for its altruistic efforts in silencing the guns without which the AU cannot achieve its objectives for both the 2020 and 21 theme of the year. As member states, we pledge to do all within our power to control the proliferation of arms and ammunition, both within and across our national borders. And we are looking forward to working closely with both the ICRC and our regional bloc, ECOWAS, for the universality of the Arms Trade Treaty so as to promote sustainable economic development in Africa and the world at large. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that statement. It is noted. Now I would like to invite Ms. Marina Schneider from UNIDROIT to make a statement. Marina, the floor is yours for the next 2 to 3 minutes.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay.
If you could put your video on, that would be great as well.
I cannot put the video on because it's not permitted by the organizer.
Okay, please
okay,
continue.
Now
then.
it's okay. I've been given the video. Thank you very much, Ahmed, and hello to everybody. It's an honor to be invited to this conference, to this webinar, and I'll be short as you ask me to tell how UNIDROIT is assisting in ensuring protection of heritage under international law, because as you know, UNIDROIT has a specific convention adopted in 1995 where mechanisms of protection fail, or even if they are good, objects still go out, being because of conflicts or just pillage, as my friend Lazar just said. They end up on the market and must be returned. So the UNIDROIT Convention puts specific mechanisms for the restitution of objects which are uniform, which means that they're the same everywhere where the convention is adopted. And it is a self-executing instrument. It does not need national domestication, which is extremely important. But also this convention is built to maintain a proper road to legal circulation of objects, which of course an interstate agreement for exchange, which for Africa is of the utmost importance for its development agenda. Through our academic project, because as we know, education and raising awareness is fundamental, we have our objective of promoting a favorable legal framework environment for return and restitution through knowledge sharing and dissemination, mainly on the UNIDROIT Convention and the model provisions that we developed with UNESCO in 2011, but also very important, and Professor Durham said it very well, the interaction between national, regional, and international law. So how do UNIDROIT support and will continue to support Africa and other member states in this? First, Mr. Kane spoke about ECOWAS action plan. We are very much involved because the UNIDROIT Convention is one of the instruments to be ratified, and so we are having meetings. I had one yesterday with a country to help them to finalize the process of ratification. We have another one today, so it's very important opportunities and technical assistance. We are also working with the African Union, and we are organizing one activity within the roadmap of this year, later in the year, with the African Union office in Geneva in particular. We are working with the G20, which is meeting in Italy currently, and with the ministerial meetings, because we need to keep the political will which exists, but it needs to be fed and continue. And also, as Article 39 of the model law of the African Union says, states must take necessary measures to to protect the cultural heritage, but also to train. And UNIDROIT has participated in a very important development under the EU Global Strategy to develop training for CSDP missions specific to cultural property. And we develop a training requirement analysis between many countries, and among them 4 African countries. We hope that soon those trainings will be implemented. And I will end by thanking again all of you for the invitation, and to reiterate UNIDROIT's readiness to stand next to Africa and to our partner organizations, and to develop and strengthen this cooperation to help countries to really ensure protection of the heritage under international law. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marina. Thank you for that. I have a question in the chat box from Musa Neoni. Musa, would you like to take the floor and ask your question directly, and please address it to the panelists that you would like them to answer? Musa? Okay, so the question from Musa is, what are the measures to be taken in areas with armed conflict on preserving objects and artifacts in African countries? So what are the measures to be taken in areas with armed conflict on preserving objects and artifacts in African countries? And the second question, so I'll club another question, and this is probably for the AU. How binding and enforceable is the AU model law, and to what extent could it be seen as an instrument that it can prevent cultural heritage and properties from destruction, as competing challenges such as joblessness, lack of democracy, and poverty contribute to the growing conflicts in Africa? This is a question from Birhanu Fikade. So who would like to go first?
I can start if you want.
Yes, please, go ahead, Lazar.
I think this is a very important question, because it comes from probably someone who is facing it on a daily basis today. And like I said, the protection of cultural property in this specific circumstances requires to deal at various levels. I think it's important first that all the means that exist today to protect cultural property at the international level are known and ratified. I think we have to say it. So we encourage governments and institutions that are not doing it to do it, because this will also allow them to domesticate them into the national law, which is important in terms of it. And the second thing, of course, it's the role that everyone plays. I think the issue of supporting capacity building, it's very important. This is where we have to join hands and to give priority to support capacity building to places and countries that are facing conflict, because this is where, you know, there is surveillance does not happen, and for example, in archaeological sites of museums, and that the government needs us more because they are dealing with many other things. And it's important that they are given priority to be supported and heard. And I think here, priority to these countries remain important. And the role of the youth, the role of the local communities are important, because they are those who are really suffering from this. These are their cultural object, their cultural property, and working with them, supporting them, it's also a very important action to be taken. And this can, of course, happen because we are supporting the local authorities, governments, institutions that have the responsibility to protect this cultural property. Thank you very much.
Perhaps
Thank
I may
you,
add on.
Yes, please, Helen, go ahead.
Thank you very much, and I can only endorse the response we just heard. But I also wanted to circle back to some of the things I mentioned in my talk, because indeed it is a very important question. So thank you for asking that question. As I noted, I think there's a range of legal implementation, and I think the fundamental issue is that this cannot happen during a conflict. Like any need to try and protect, it has to be done before a conflict. And often I say, you can't do a fire drill in the middle of a fire. It's a simple example, but I think it's really, really important. We have to identify where the particular cultural property is that we want to protect. That has to be done in advance, such as an inventory. We have to, as mentioned, have the domestic legislation in place. We have to make sure that we don't put military objectives, legitimate places that can be attacked, that we don't locate those military objectives next to important and identified cultural property. And we also need to make sure, as mentioned before, that there's been training. So I think there are many, many things we need to do, far too numerous for me to talk about now, but I just wanted to flag a few of these. I know, as I mentioned before, my colleagues are on standby and we work beautifully with UNESCO. So I once again agree, we have a wonderful partnership, but our colleagues are on standby to assist in these matters. But I think the thing we need to also walk away today is realize that it cannot be done during conflict. That's too late.